$1 million in retirement savings. For a lot of people, that's the number. That's the finish line. You hit seven figures and you feel like you should be set for life. But here's the thing I see sitting across from people every week at Riverbend. Two people could walk in the door, the exact same $1 million, and depending on three or four decisions, most of which people make without even realizing they're making them, you could see an income swing of $2,000 to $3,000 a month. And that's the difference between watching every dollar in retirement or living the life you actually planned for. My name's Tyler. I'm a financial advisor at Riverbend. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through two real scenarios, a married couple and a single person, both with $1 million, and show you what their retirement income looks like when you factor in things like Social Security, taxes, withdrawal strategy, and the stuff that honestly most calculators completely ignore. Let's get into it. And real quick, if you want to see what your specific situation looks like with your savings, your Social Security, your tax picture, that's what we do at Riverbend. There's a link in the description below to book a free discovery meeting. We'll look at your numbers and we'll be able to give you a clearer picture on where you stand. All right, let me introduce our couple. Meet James and Patricia. Real people, but the names have been changed. They're 62 and they're entering retirement. Now, here's a little background on them. James worked for 28 years in logistics. Patricia was an office manager for a medical practice. She did that for about 20 years. She stepped back to help raise the kids and then eventually went back part-time for the last 8 years. Now, between the two of them, they've saved just over $1 million. And when we sat down, you could feel that. They were proud of what they had built. 28 years, going to work, showing up, making the contributions, not touching it. But there was also this little bit of nervousness because $1 million sounds like a lot until you're the one who has to make it last the rest of your life. Here's a little snapshot of their financial picture. James had $620,000 in a traditional IRA. Patricia had $180,000 in a 401k, $130,000 in a joint brokerage account, and about $70,000 in cash and savings. No debt. Mortgage was paid off, and the home was worth about $375,000. Now, with this in mind, the first thing that we really want to do before we start building structure around a plan is understand their goals and objectives. What do they want out of retirement? That's the question we need to ask. And for James and Patricia, they wanted to finally be able to travel a couple times a year, help their daughter with a down payment at some point, and honestly, they just didn't want to have to stress about whether they could afford dinner on a Friday night. And I know for a fact that they do a date night every single Friday night, every week. Now, this becomes the lens in which we build our plan. And then from there, we can begin to see what life looks like and what it's going to cost. I like to use what's called the bottom-up approach. We would look at what they're spending today, subtract the stuff that goes away in retirement, like commuting costs or payroll taxes, and then we could add the things that show up, like more travel, healthcare. And for James and Patricia, that number comes out to about $6,500 a month. So let's take a look with $1 million, what that would actually generate for James and Patricia. So at $6,500 a month, that's $78,000 a year. And at 62, neither one of them is getting a Social Security check yet. So that means every single dollar they need is coming straight from their savings. Now, $78,000 a year on a $1 million portfolio means they're pulling about 7.8% of their savings every year. And that percentage, how much money you're actually pulling out, what your withdrawal rate is probably one of the most important numbers in retirement planning. You'll hear stuff from planners that tell you between 4% to 6% will give you a good chance at lasting 30 years. And there's some deeper stuff we can do around this. But for sure, at 7.8%, James and Patricia are above that range, and it can start to feel a little bit uncomfortable from a planning perspective. Now, the hard part is it's only going to go up. You see, their expenses aren't going to just stay at $78,000 a year because this thing called inflation. So year by year, that number is going to increase. And by the time they hit 67, they could be spending closer to $88,000 or even $90,000 a year. And with their portfolio, earning 5% annually after 5 years, pulling that kind of income out, nothing coming in, they could be looking at a balance of somewhere between, let's call it $750,000 to $800,000. Now that's $250,000 gone before a single Social Security check ever shows up. $1 million is a lot of money. But when it's the only thing funding your life for 5 years, it moves a lot faster than you'd think. The good news is this phase is temporary because something's going to change at 67 and the whole picture begins to shift. Now, at 67, James will start collecting Social Security. After 28 years in logistics, a solid income throughout his whole career, he's got an estimated benefit at full retirement age of about $2,600 a month. Patricia, on the other hand, it's a little bit lower. If you remember, she stepped out of work for a little bit, stayed home with the kids, and then went back part-time. So her estimated benefits at 67 is about $1,300 a month. Now, she could also qualify for what's called the spousal benefit based on James's record if it ends up being higher. But for this scenario, let's just use her own benefit. Combined, that's $3,900 a month or $46,800 a year in guaranteed income. And that shows up whether the market's up, down, or sideways. And projecting out, we see their expenses at this point have grown with inflation to about $90,000 a year. So now the portfolio only needs to cover the gap. And that gap's about $43,200 a year or $3,600 a month. And on a portfolio that's sitting around $775,000, they're pulling out 5.6% a year. Now, that's still a little bit on the higher end, but it's a completely different situation than the 7.8% they were dealing with at 62. And this is where things start to open up for them. How much room they actually have is going to depend on what James and Patricia do between now and then. And honestly, this is where people leave a lot of money on the table. So let's talk through a couple things they can do. This is where James and Patricia are going to go from hoping it works to knowing it works. And the reason I want to talk through these is that most people don't do any of them. And it's not because they're super complicated. It's that no one ever really explains why they matter. The first thing we want to look at in this transitional phase is Social Security timing. Right now, we have James taking Social Security at 67, $2,600 a month. But if he delays to 70, that benefit could grow to roughly $3,225 a month. That's an extra $625 a month every month for the rest of his life. Now, the natural reaction to this is, why would I wait 3 more years? I have worked, I have put in the time, I want my money now. And look, I get it. But when you think about what that $625 a month actually means over time, if James lives to 90, that decision to wait 3 years could put an additional $150,000 in his pocket. And that's guaranteed income. Doesn't depend on the stock market, doesn't depend on interest rates. It just shows up. Now, the trade-off is that from 67 to 70, the portfolio has to cover the full gap without James's Social Security helping at all. That's 3 more years of higher withdrawals. Now, with $1 million portfolio, they can likely handle it, especially if Patricia takes her benefit at 67 to bring in a little bit of guaranteed income while James waits. Now, this is one of those decisions where the math says wait. And I get it. Every instinct inside of you says take it now. And I get that. But when people actually see the numbers side by side, the decision gets a lot easier. Now, the second thing is one where we can see people save the most money over their lifetime, and that's the tax gap window. The tax gap is a period between when you retire and when Social Security and RMDs start pushing your income back up into higher brackets. For James and Patricia, that's roughly 62 to 67. During those years, they have no taxable income. No paychecks, no Social Security, no RMDs. Their income is whatever they choose for it to be and from whatever accounts they want to pull it from. And that makes these the lowest tax years they're probably ever going to have. Now, here's why that matters. James has $620,000 sitting in a traditional IRA. Every dollar in that account is going to be taxed as ordinary income when it comes out. And if he doesn't touch it, at 73, the IRS is going to come knocking, forcing him to take that money out through RMDs. And on a $620,000 portfolio that's been growing for 11 years, those RMDs could easily be $50,000 to $70,000 a year. And that's income he has to take whether he likes it or not, whether he wants to or not. And that is going to get taxed at whatever bracket he's in at that point. But right now at 62 to 67, there are things that they can do strategically while they're in lower tax brackets. Over a 20 or 30 year retirement, the difference between paying 12% now and 22% later on hundreds of thousands of dollars is not small. We're talking potentially $80,000 to $120,000 in tax savings. That's money that stays in their pocket instead of going to the IRS. Now, most people don't do this because it feels wrong to pay taxes when you don't have to. You're retired, you have no income, and now you want me to voluntarily write a check to the IRS? That goes against every instinct, but it's one of the smartest moves you can make early in retirement. Now, Roth conversions are not always the right move. There are definitely situations where they can backfire, but for James and Patricia, in this window, the math is clear. Now, there's a third layer here that connects all of this together, and that's healthcare. James and Patricia are 62. Medicare doesn't start until they're 65. And how much they withdraw from their accounts during those years is going to directly affect whether they qualify for subsidies for health insurance on the ACA marketplace. So, the Social Security decision, the Roth conversion decision, and the healthcare decision are all connected. You really can't make one without affecting the other. And honestly, I think that's why most people just get it wrong. They optimize one thing without realizing it's hurting them somewhere else. So what does $1 million actually generate for James and Patricia? Well, if they do nothing strategic at all, which might not be smart, they take their Social Security at 62, pull from whatever account is easiest, ignore the tax window, they're probably looking at $5,000 to $5,500 a month. That's livable, but it's tight. And it gets tighter every single year as inflation begins to chip away at it. But if they can coordinate their Social Security timing, use the gap years for Roth conversions, sequence their withdrawals to minimize tax, and plan their healthcare coverage around their income, they could be looking at $6,500 to even $7,000 a month. So it's the same $1 million, but $1,500 to $2,000 more per month. Not because they saved more, but because they were intentional about how they used what they had. That gap between unplanned and planned is what this is all really about. So that's James and Patricia. But what if you're doing this by yourself? You got the same $1 million, but only one Social Security check, narrow tax brackets, and nobody splitting the cost with you. The math changes more than most people expect. So let's take a look at what this looks like when you're doing it alone. Meet Sharon. She's 62, lives outside of Charlotte. She spent most of her career as a senior project manager in healthcare. Good income, consistent saver, but divorced about 10 years ago. Now she's got $1 million saved, $700,000 in her traditional IRA, $150,000 in a Roth, and $150,000 in a brokerage account. She's got no debt, owns a townhome, and it's worth $310,000. So, like before, what we want to do is we want to understand Sharon's goals. We want to know her values, what she wants out of retirement, because this helps us understand her numbers. She wants to maintain her lifestyle. She wants to visit her kids in Denver and Boston a few times a year. And she really just wants enough cushion that she's not lying awake at night running through the numbers in her head. And I get it. This can get stressful, especially when you're doing it by yourself. Now, after we run a bottom-up analysis, looking at expenses that might be going away or increasing in retirement, her number came out to about $5,500 a month. It sounds like she should be in pretty great shape, but let's see what the numbers actually say. So here we go. Sharon needs $5,500 a month, $66,000 a year, and at 62, she's not collecting Social Security. So every dollar she needs is coming from her savings. And at $66,000 a year on $1 million portfolio, that means she's pulling about 6.6% annually. That's a little bit above the range where most planners feel comfortable. It's only going to climb with inflation. Every single year, that number is going to go up. Let's see what it looks like. In her first year, she pulls out $66,000. In year 2, with a 3% inflation, she needs about $68,000. By year 5, she's pulling closer to $76,000. And even with a portfolio earning 5% a year after 5 years of withdrawals and no income, Sharon is looking at a balance somewhere, we'll call it $850,000 to $875,000. It's about $125,000 to $150,000 gone. Now, not as dramatic as what we saw in the couple, but remember, she's got no second check coming in to bail her out. With James and Patricia, they had that second person's Social Security check to come and alleviate some pressure. But this is just Sharon, and it's whatever she saved. So Sharon spent her career in healthcare IT. She worked hard, she did well for herself, and her estimated Social Security benefit at full retirement age of 67 is about $2,700 a month. And that's solid for a single person. But compare that to James and Patricia's combined $3,900. Sharon's only getting about 70% of what the couple gets in guaranteed income, and she's covering it all by herself. Now, just like the couple, her expenses have been growing with inflation. And so by 67, she's spending closer to $76,000 a year, or about $6,400 a month. And with $2,700 a month from Social Security, she still needs about $3,700 a month, or $44,000 a year. And on a portfolio that's been drawn down for 5 years and might be sitting around $850,000 to $875,000, that puts her roughly at a 5% to 5.2% annual withdrawal rate. And look, that works, but there's noticeably less room for a bad market year, an unexpected expense, or a health scare, especially less margin than the couple had. Now, here's the part that catches people off guard. Even with the same $1 million, Sharon's situation is structurally harder than James and Patricia's. It's not because she did anything wrong, it's just how the system works when you're on your own. And one of the most obvious differences is around Social Security. See, James and Patricia get $3,900 a month combined income. Sharon's at $2,700. That's $1,200 less in guaranteed income every single month, which means her portfolio has to work harder and longer. And that's before you even get to taxes. Sharon's filing is single, which means her tax brackets are narrow. That 12% bracket for a single filer tops out at about $48,000 in taxable income. For a married couple, that's closer to $97,000 a year. So Sharon hits higher tax rates faster, which limits how much room she has for things like Roth conversions or capital gains harvesting. On top of that, she's covering every household expense on her own. The utilities, insurance, property taxes, maintenance, every single piece of it. James and Patricia split a $375,000 house. Sharon carries a $310,000 townhome all by herself. And then there's that one thing no one really talks about. If something goes wrong with Sharon's health down the road, there's no spouse to help with care. There's no spouse's income to keep the household running. There's no spouse's Social Security check to fall back on. She's her own safety net. And that's not something you can solve with a spreadsheet. That's something you have to plan for. And it's so uncomfortable to think about, but it points to the fact that Sharon doesn't need less margin in her plan. She needs more. So what can Sharon do? Well, first, if she delays her Social Security to 70, her benefit will grow from $2,700 to roughly $3,350 a month. That's an extra $650 a month for the rest of her life. And over 25 years, that adds up. That's additional guaranteed income. But delaying means her portfolio has to cover everything from 62 to 70. That's 8 years with no Social Security coming in, and with $1 million starting point, she can probably make that work, but it does require careful planning, and she has to be realistic about her spending during those early years. Now, the second thing is Roth conversions. She's got $700,000 in a traditional IRA, and that's going to create a problem at 73 because this thing called required minimum distributions, RMDs. And on an account that size, after years of growth, those forced withdrawals could easily push her into a higher tax bracket. Whether she needs it, whether she wants it, it's happening. Now, the smart move is to start converting portions of that IRA into a Roth during the low income years, from 62 to Social Security. But here's where being single hurts. Her tax brackets are half the width of the married couples. She has less room each year to convert before she bumps into a higher rate. So she's got to start early, she's got to stay disciplined, and she's got to convert what she can every single year. Because every dollar she moves into that Roth now is a dollar that's going to grow tax-free and is not going to be forced out as taxable income later. Now, the next decision is probably one of the biggest for someone in Sharon's position, and that's the decision around long-term care. You see, James and Patricia have each other. If one of them needs help at 80, the other one can step in, at least initially. Sharon doesn't have that option. If she needs assisted living or in-home care, she's paying for all of that out of her own pocket. Now, the average cost of a private room nursing facility can creep up to over $100,000 a year, and even 2 to 3 years of that can take a serious bite out of your portfolio. Now, I'm not saying she necessarily needs long-term care insurance, but she needs to have a plan on how she's going to handle it. whether it's earmarking a portion of her Roth for healthcare costs or something with home equity as a reserve she can tap into, or some combination. Whatever it is, she needs a plan and she needs to have thought about it before it happens, because the time you actually need long-term care, it's too late to start planning for it. So what does $1 million generate for Sharon? Without a plan, taking Social Security whenever she wants to, pulling from the IRA by default, no tax strategy, she's looking at about $4,500 to $5,000 a month. Now, that covers her basics, but there's no room for cushion. One big surprise, a big health scare, a major home repair, a year where the market's down by 20%, and it's happened, and that plan starts to feel fragile. But with a plan, optimized Social Security timing, disciplined Roth conversions starting early, pulling from the right accounts at the right time in the right order, and a real strategy for long-term care, she's looking at $5,500 to $6,000 a month. And that's the retirement she actually wants. Travel to see her kids, flexibility to say yes to the things she wants to do, and the ability to sleep at night knowing she's not one bad break away from trouble. That's about $1,000 a month difference. And over a 30-year retirement, $1,000 a month adds up to over $360,000. That's not a rounding error. That's the difference between a retirement that works on paper and the one that actually feels like the life she planned for. So now you know what $1 million can actually generate for both couples and singles. And you probably noticed that Roth conversions came up in both scenarios as one of the most powerful moves you can make in early retirement. Here's the thing. Roth conversions aren't always the right call. There are situations where doing a Roth conversion can actually cost you money, mess up your healthcare subsidies, or push you into a higher tax bracket that wipes out the whole benefit. I made a video breaking down exactly when Roth conversions backfire and what to do instead right over here. The alternative might actually put more money in your pocket, so that's definitely the video I'd watch next. I'll see you there.